Greetings, guys and Gaias. This is the intro to Rhesus-negative blood group research, a comprehensive study guide by JRAnthony 2022. Disclaimer: I am not a medical professional. However, this research is the result of many years of personal studies. All relevant links are in the description. Episode 9: Explaining Overall Health Concerns and Targeted Individuals. As you have learned in previous videos, the Rhd negative blood group creates antibodies to the Rhd antigen that triggers an immune response. This is commonly called Rh disease. Rh disease, also called Rh incompatibility, which I prefer to use instead, happens when your blood is Rh negative and your baby's blood is Rh positive. Again, it is important to note that this is not a disease, but a natural immune response to the Rhd antigen, which is an inherited protein unnatural to mammal platelets and red blood cells. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. The question should not be where does the Rh negative come from, but where does the Rhd antigen come from, and how can we eradicate it? Now, when discussing Rh negative health concerns and overall health status, there is conflicting data that needs clarified so that there isn't any further misunderstanding or misinterpreting of medical science and studies. Shortly, we will look at a study that will answer questions about whether Rh negs are more resilient or susceptible to infectious diseases and viruses versus health disorders and various other ailments. If you remember in my previous video, I've shown that Rh negs are more resilient against COVID and are less likely to have HIV/AIDS, to name a few, but not limited to. These are considered viral and/or infectious diseases. It's also important to remember and understand why the Rh positives are more vulnerable. It is because the Rhd antigen inherited on the surface of their red blood cells that makes a person test Rh positive acts as a receptor or adherent for other pathogens to communicate with human cells through physical interactions with various human proteins, the Rh antigen, on the surface of the red blood cells, and thus are able to penetrate within the interior of the cell. And again, if you're confused on what I'm saying, please go back and start at episode 1 and watch each one of those. And you can also check out my Facebook page, Rhesus Negative Research, which all links will be located in the description. These interactions allow the pathogen to enter the host cell, manipulate important cellular processes, multiply, and invade other cells. Also remember in the last episode we discussed antigenic variation and antigenic escape to trick or elude the immune system into accepting the Rhd antigen so that you can then quote-unquote acquire or inherit it and pass it on. Basically, everyone should be born Rh negative. Unfortunately, the Rhd antigen is highly contagious itself, which causes a large majority of people to inherit or acquire the Rhd antigen on the surface of their red blood cells and causes them to test Rh positive for the Rhd antigen. This is very similar to detecting the spike protein in which person tests positive for COVID. Again, if you're having trouble following my point here, please go back and watch all the videos on this channel starting with episode 1. Remember, the Rhd antigen is not normal, although people can live with it, obviously. However, this does not mean that it's harmless. There are greater risks to society because of the Rhd antigen that makes a person Rh positive. We must not ever forget this. Moving on to this first article to further prove my point, it's titled Rhesus-negative males have an enhanced IFNY-mediated immune response to influenza A virus. Now remember, all the links to the studies that and all the information I'm showing you in this video are located in the description. Now don't be intimidated by that article title. I'm going to read to you an excerpt from that article that really sums it up and makes the point here. It says that the Rhesus-D antigen, Rhd positive, has been associated with susceptibility to several viral infections. Reports suggest that Rhd negative individuals are better protected against infectious diseases and have overall better health. Okay, let me read that again. Reports suggest that Rhd negative individuals are better protected against infectious diseases and have overall better health. Now, this might sound confusing and contradictory when you hear the title of the next study that is called Worse Health Status and Higher Incidence of Health Disorders in Rhesus-negative Subjects. And while they may sound contradictory to each other, they're really not, and I will get to explaining that later in the video. Notice that in this study, it claims that the biological function of the Rhd molecule is unknown. And that is why I said earlier in this video that we should not be asking ourselves, where does the Rh negative come from, but where does the Rhd antigen come from and how can we eradicate it? This is because the Rhd molecule is an antigen. Remember, the actual definition of an antigen is a toxin or other foreign substance which induces an immune response in the body, especially the production of antibodies. The article goes on to say that some data indicate that Rhd positive and Rhd negative subjects differ in their tolerance to certain biological factors, including toxoplasma infection, aging, and fatigue. And on the subject of aging, you will find that a lot of, or most, Rh negatives age at a slower rate, meaning we look younger for longer and often don't have gray hair until much later in life. And Rhesus-negative subjects report to have more frequent allergic, digestive, heart, hematological, immunity, mental health, and neurological problems. This will be explained later in the video. This second study also reported the usage of more drugs prescribed by doctors per day, attended more specialized doctors, namely dermatologists, gynecologists, internal medicine doctors, neurologists, and psychiatrists, specifically in men, in the past 2 years, a higher frequency of headaches and being tired more often than the Rhd positive subjects. Incidence of various diseases and disorders also differ between Rhd negative and Rhd positive subjects, mostly being higher in the former Rh negative. As I read more of this article, bear with me because I'm going to be giving some important insight later in the video that's critical for Rh negatives to be aware of, as well as Rh positives. It goes on to say that Rhd negative subjects have increased the risk of developing certain heart diseases, respiratory disease, and some immunity and autoimmunity related diseases, for example, rheumatoid arthritis. The general pattern suggests that Rhd negative subjects could have problems with autoimmunity. Notice I said could have problems, because they're thinking if we have the Rh incompatibility, then there must be other issues. But again, I told you, that is a natural immune response to an antigen, not an abnormal response. That's why I prefer to call it the Rh incompatibility instead of the Rh disease. Anyway, it says it could be more resistant to infections of viral origin and could be less resistant to infections of bacterial origin. For example, Rhd negative men more often reported certain mental health disorders, including panic disorders, antisocial personality disorders, and attention deficit, tics, fasciculation, I'm not sure how to pronounce that word, thyroiditis, immunity disorders, allergies, especially skin allergies, excessive bleedings, anemia, osteoporosis, liver disease, infectious diseases, and acute diarrhea diseases, while they less often reported gallbladder attacks, celiac disease, maldigestion, malabsorption, warts, some types of cancer, and prostate hypertrophy. Rhd negative women reported more frequently psoriasis, constipation, and diarrheas, ischemic diseases, type 2 diabetes, some types of cancers, lymphatic node swelling, vitamin B deficiency, thrombosis, tonsil stones, too high sex drive, which I'm going to talk about later, precocious puberty, urinary tract infections, scoliosis, and they less often reported hearing loss, weight loss, hypoglycemia, glaucoma, fasciculation, and warts. I really can't pronounce that word. Rhd negative subjects had to make more frequent visits to medical professionals specializing in otolaryngology, psychiatry, gynecology, and dermatology. All right, now that I've read those articles, it's time to make some sense out of it. Rh-negs having a worse health status and higher incidence of health disorders is not because there's a problem with the Rh-negative immune system per se. Rh-negative's immune systems work perfectly normal against foreign antigens and pathogens, and some say we have super immune systems. This immune response can occasionally and rarely result in the immune system attacking itself in the event it encounters an antigen or pathogen like the Rhd antigen, the AIDS virus, and STDs, or even COVID-19, for example. As mentioned before, Rh incompatibility is not a disease. Some articles suggest that autoimmunity may be a side effect of a strong immune system enabling them to live longer. Also, the immune response to the Rhd antigen is not an autoimmune response. Autoimmune means relating to disease caused by the antibodies, which this is not caused by the antibody, it's caused by the Rhd antigen, produced against substances naturally present in the body. Because Rhd antigen is not naturally present in mammal platelets and red blood cells, we naturally create an antibody against it. The Rh incompatibility that they are calling the Rh disease is not caused by the Rhd antibody. It's caused by the Rhd antigen, which is a foreign toxin or substance, not naturally found in mammals, okay? So let's take a look at the differences between the two studies I've presented. The first one was said that Rhd negative individuals are better protected against infectious diseases and have overall better health. The second one said worse health status and higher incidence of health disorders in Rhesus negative subjects. In the first study, notice that it says, however, potential mechanisms contributing to these associations have not yet been defined. In this section of the video, I will attempt to identify and explain these mechanisms contributing to differences between the claims of both studies. This particular study, number 1, is speaking of Rh negatives as better protected against infectious diseases and/or viruses and having overall better health. This means that we are unlikely to die suddenly from these, and if we do contract a virus or infectious disease, we are less likely to have severe symptoms leading to death. COVID and HIV/AIDS are two great examples. And again, links to prove this in those actual studies are in the description of this video. This also depends on how and where the diseases and viruses are acquired. Notice that in this study it says that however, potential mechanisms contributing to these associations have not yet been defined. The second study is speaking of the side effects and consequences of certain intrinsic and extrinsic contributing factors such as environmental influence, lifestyle, particularly consumerism, family medical history, economic hardship, and childhood trauma, which is stress-induced health conditions. I will discuss this later in the video when I talk about Rh-negs as targeted individuals. Rh-negatives being original heirloom humans and thus native to Earth, which is my personal theory, and I will highlight this talking point later in the video, are highly sensitive to technology and the industrial environment, as well as to man-made products which cause skin sensitivities, mental and nervous system disturbances, gastrointestinal issues, cancers, and more. In addition to that, there are several other contributing factors to the worse health status and higher incidence of health disorders among Rh-negative subjects, such as the bioaccumulation of toxins, synthetic hormones, forever chemicals, steroids, genetic modifications, DNA damage, mitochondrial disorders, and accelerated aging, which of course Rh-negatives are more resilient to. And that's just to name a few, but not limited to. Of course, Rh positives are also susceptible to these unnatural things, but appear to have greater tolerance of consuming and exposure to the unnatural or synthetic version of things. But blood type A's and specifically Rh-negs have a less tolerance to those things, and we seem to have more side effects and symptoms of our environment, an unnatural industrialized environment. Some may consider this a good thing for Rh positives, but I don't. This is industrialized chaos, not industrialized civilization. Not to mention the mass psychosis that a large majority of people suffer from due to indoctrination, misinformation, and disinformation on a wide variety of issues and subjects. And that's the topic for another video. And finally, there is a third study that I would like to discuss before moving on to Rh-negs as targeted individuals. It is titled Rhesus-minus Phenotype as a Predictor of Sexual Desire and Behavior, Wellbeing, Mental Health, and Fecundity. It reads, the present study showed that Rh negativity was associated with the impaired economic situations and well-being and improved physical health of women and with the impaired economic situations and mental health of men. The strength of the observed associations was relatively low, especially in comparison with other negative factors such as smoking, consuming alcohol, and high BMI. Surprisingly, we also found a relatively strong positive association of Rh negativity with the sexual activity of male and female responders. In Rh negative men, the higher sexual activity, higher number of past sexual partners, past French kissing partners, and larger part of a day usually spent by sexual activities including consuming pornography, contrasted with the trend for their lower sexual desire. No such trend for sexual desire was observed in Rh negative women. It can be only speculated whether the higher sexual activity of Rh negative subjects is part of the transition from a slow to a faster life strategy in individuals as a result of worse health status and correspondingly lower life expectancy. Now, reading the conclusion of the rest of that article, it says the present study performed on a self-selected internet population had shown that the Rh negative subjects report worse quality of life than the Rh positive subjects, which leads into us being targeted individuals. Later, we'll talk about that. It also has been confirmed that men had worse mental health, women had better physical health, but both men and women, Rh negs, had worse economic situations. And it said Rh negative subjects also reported higher sexual activity than the Rh positive subjects, and that the effects of Rh negativity were less numerous and weaker than the effects of smoking, alcohol consumption, and high BMI. But it goes on to say it must be remembered, however, that the total number of Rh negative subjects in the human population is large and that Rh negative subjects stay affected by their Rh negativity permanently. Therefore, if the effects observed in our sample are present in the general population, their total impact on public health could be larger than that of some formerly stronger effects, such as the impact of alcohol consumption. And going back, I'm going to read that again. It says Rh negative subjects stay affected by their Rh negativity permanently. Okay? And it says it must be remembered that the total number of Rh negative subjects in the human population is large. Now, people commonly say that, 85% of the world is Rhesus positive, but actually 94% of the world is Rhesus positive. And I will show you an image here from my Facebook page that states that. Let me get to it. I've done research on this. People spread a lot of misinformation out there. On my post, it says Rh positives are not 85% of the human population. They are 94%. When people say that the Rh negs are 85% of the population, this is within the U.S., not worldwide. Please get your facts straight. It's important. Rh negs are 6% and declining. It says population data. According to a comprehensive study, the worldwide frequency of Rh positive and Rh negative blood types is approximately 94% and 6% respectively. The same study concluded that the share of the population with the Rh negative blood type is set to fall further in the future, primarily due to low population growth in Europe. Analyzing this study, mental health issues and diagnosis among Rh negatives are due to our general nonconformity, free thinking, unwillingness to take orders blindly, deviating from what's normally considered acceptable. The claims of Rh-negs having higher sexual activity and desire is most likely true due to several things, one of which is that we intuitively know that our kind, Rh-negs, is at risk of being extinct and or exterminated intentionally by those, particularly Rh positives, who view us as crazy, mentally ill, descendants of ancient aliens, and not from this planet, etc., and perceive us as a threat in general. Remember, in a future video, I'll be discussing and debunking myths and conspiracies. Fecundity is a word mentioned in the title of the study, which means the ability to produce an abundance of offspring or new growth, fertility, or the ability to produce many new ideas. As free thinkers and truth seekers, master decoders and dot connectors, Rh negatives have no problem with producing new ideas. However, having a higher sexual desire and increased sexual activity is preservation of self and ensuring subsequent generations of Rh-negs. I will discuss this in a future video regarding the demonization of Rh-negs, debunking myths and conspiracies. Both men and women had bad or worse economic situations than Rh positives reported, and states that Rh negatives stay affected by their Rh negativity permanently. Let me say that again. Rh negatives stay affected by their Rh negativity permanently. You can see now that this claim will open the door for them to be able to diagnose Rh negs with various mental health disorders and disabilities, which will ultimately leave us dependent on government assistance, further demonizing us out of normal society by posing that there is something inherently wrong with us Rh-negs instead of something being wrong with those who have the Rhd antigen and are Rh positive. It is only a small part of their inverted narrative against us. This leads me to the subject of Rh-negs as targeted individuals. It is my belief that we are truly targeted and that our worse economic situations are increased by the stealth war being waged against us, which intentionally causes a lifetime of hardship, leading to the so-called increased risk of mental disorders and stress-related health issues. However, some people's special interests and agenda are aware of Rh-negs' true capabilities, talents, and powers, and will use us for their own means. The article titled Rhesus Negative and DNA Correlations provides us with some important insight on this. It states, the intelligence agencies also prefer Rh negative people who possess the CCR5 delta 32 gene, although this is not mandatory. This gene is found only in European, West Asian, and North African populations. This gene causes people to have a resistance to the HIV virus, as they've already proven through actual government studies, and other diseases that need the CCR5 protein to enter cells in order to cause infection. These rare deleted genes originated in the Caucasian race, and having these genes can cause you to be a targeted individual. Again, it's not a gene, it's the absence of the Rhd antigen. Remember that. Being Rh negative is not a gene. It's the absence of that Rhd antigen protein that this article here says enters the cell in order to cause infection. You may experience a wide variety of intrusions into your life. These intrusions can range from simply having medical records monitored to mysterious paranormal experiences. The NSA is an American organization that runs projects in and outside of the United States. James stated he was chosen for Project Mannequin, which is a British MK Ultra sub-project, due to his father's involvement in the Illuminati intelligence community and because he possesses rare Celtic genetics. He and his family have Rh-negative blood. James Caspel has reported that the NSA recruits Celtic Rh-negative people because they believe people with these genetics have a predisposition to have paranormal experiences and psychic abilities, such as telepathy, precognition, and clairvoyance. For many generations, ancient Celtic people practiced psychic and magic rituals for their pagan religion. The NSA and other top intelligence agencies believe psychic abilities are in the genetic memories of the Rh-negative bloodlines. Even if a Rh-negative individual hasn't practiced PSI abilities, they can be easily trained to do so. Now, I find it interesting that this article uses monarch butterflies as an example of genetic memory, in addition to mentioning the abilities of Celtic people. First of all, I've been a registered and certified monarch waystation for 5 years now. And also, I'm 96%, yes, 96% an ancient Celtic Briton by autosomal DNA. And if you know anything about Celts, they originate from Anatolia. Babylon is known a place for Celts. And then obviously they had to flee because they've been invaded, just like the British Isles. A lot of people don't realize that the British Isles was invaded numerous times by people trying to Christianize these Celts. See Celts making of America. And also you can look up the Basque and Celtic connection. And I just wanted to say real quick that I will be doing a future video on my DNA test results so that you can verify that I am Celtic. I'm a Celtic woman. And actually, in my autosomal DNA, I'm 100% a Celtic Briton, autosomally. And again, there's a difference between autosomal DNA and mtDNA, and I'll show you that as well, which I show as having Iberian and Middle Eastern, and it just confirms the migration path of the Celts. And if you don't know information about that, again, like I said, see Celts Making America, and also the Christianization of Celts, which is the reason why we had to flee and wound up in the British Isles, and then we didn't have anywhere to go from there other than America. Anyway, further topics to consider when discussing Rh-negs as targeted individuals and white people in general, specifically blood type A's, whether Rh positive or Rh negative, are race baiting, racism, erasure of white people. And again, look up these topics on your own, do your own research on these topics, because I do believe that they play a part in us being targeted individuals, not just now, but in the past. Police brutality claims, which is using false equivalents to race bait us. Fertility rates, the stealth sterilization of whites and depopulation agenda. Remember, white people are a minority. Most of the world consists of non-whites. Look it up yourself. Ancient extinction of whites via ancient technology. Keep your eyes on China and India. Christianization and extermination of earthy peoples and knowledge. Like I said, Celtic culture and migration, witch hunts, mystics, and mantics. And now I'm going to talk about the Parthenogenesis, which is another reason we're targeted individuals. Parthenogenesis is not a one-time event. And in case you're confused, Parthenogenesis is the scientific name for virgin birth and immaculate conception. Preservation of white race when faced with the threat of extinction is when parthenogenesis is quote-unquote activated within Rh-negs. Dr. Raymond Bernard's quote says that the Immaculate Conception has been made to appear miraculous and supernatural, a solitary event incapable of repetition, and something in which every rational and scientific mind must reject as absurd, has prevented the birth of many more individuals like Jesus and greater ones during the last several thousand years. So what he's saying there is they're suppressing the truth that this is not a one-time event. And Marija Gambutis, who says, the parthenogenetic goddess has been the most persistent feature in the archaeological record. Now, I don't believe in the biblical version or patriarchal interpretation of Jesus, but the word Jesus is almost identical to Rhesus. Just take off the RH and replace it with a J. Rhesus, Jesus. However, Christ is not a male son born of a virgin, but she is the Rh negative woman who can conceive on her own in order to prevent the extinction of the white race and all of humanity. This is not to suggest that Jesus, as taught in the Bible, is the origin of Rh negative blood. However, it is suggesting that the Immaculate Conception or virgin birth, known scientifically as parthenogenesis, occurred among Rh-neg females and was not a one-time event, but rather occurs when a species is facing a threat of some kind that could potentially cause extinction or trying to eradicate a virus from its DNA by creating antibodies against it. This is why Rh-negs are thought of as reptilians, because they are a species that is known for parthenogenesis among many other species. This is a scientific fact, by the way. Look it up. Also, the ability to shapeshift has been misunderstood. Rh negatives are persecuted witches and heretics that later evolved to witch hunts after the whole Parthenogenesis instance, as a result of the fear of Parthenogenesis and the earthy wisdom and knowledge of Celtic peoples. Now I'm going to read you a quote written by Mary Daly in Pure Lust, Elemental Feminist Philosophy. And in this book, she also touches base on the Celtic people being Christianized as well. And the links to the discussion for that book and free reading on one of my websites is located in the description. She says, "We have seen that the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception appeared much later in Christian myth and theology than did the virgin birth. Many centuries of preparation were required for acceptance of this belief. To put the matter bluntly, symbolically speaking, the goddess had to be totally done in order to be an appropriate mother of God. The fact that the church could not get around to this tidying up of the goddess murder program until recently would seem to have been a matter of political strategy. For as we have seen, the power of the archimage had been needed in order to convert the pagans, even at the risk that this power might get out of hand." And she's talking about the Parthenogenesis, the virgin birth. They wanted to pose it as a one-time event, and then they went on their witch hunts. As she says, "Moreover, it is chronologically significant that the proclamation of this dogma followed the European witch craze for the mass murder of women, particularly Celtic women in my opinion, and its deep psychic impact paved the way for the deceptively degrading dogma. And this is the truth that they never want us to remember about ourselves, our ability for human parthenogenesis. We must never forget about it. Also, interesting scripture that says this, that I believe this is what it's talking about, says, 'I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head and you will strike his heel.' Now, I find that interesting. Put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers, meaning parthenogenesis, virgin birth. The Bible is full of contradictions and truth and lies intertwined. Note, there is no such thing as an Rh gene or Jesus gene. You are either Rh positive and have the Rhd antigen, or you don't and you're Rh negative. Being Rh negative means you are simply absent of the Rhd antigen. It is not a gene. Again, it is my personal theory, backed up with plenty of evidence, that the white race is heirloom original humans and native to the earth, and that we are being perpetually targeted for depopulation. Blood type A is the oldest blood type, not type O. I've explained in episode 7 why blood type O is a universal donor, because blood type O is the blood in most demand due to violence and infectious diseases. And again, there's plenty of studies on this, but the universal donor must always be Rh neg. And here's 2 articles that say, in molecular history, type A appears to be the oldest blood type, in the sense that the mutations that gave rise to types O and B appear to stem from it. Geneticists call this the wild type, or ancestral allele. I like calling it the wild type because it goes along with the Celtic theory that I'm posing. And then another article from Live Science says, blood type A is the most ancient, and it existed before the human species evolved from its hominid ancestors. Type B is thought to have originated some 3.5 million years ago from a genetic mutation that modified one of the sugars that sit on the surface of the red blood cells. Now again, I don't believe in the timeline that people believe in, and whether you believe that the earth is a couple thousand years old or billion years old is irrelevant to the point that I'm making here. It's up to you to connect the dots and see the pattern and purpose of this inverted narrative against us. The demonization of the Rh negs is an attempt to pose us as being from another world. Same goes for why they posed the story of virgin birth and immaculate conception as a one-time event, so as to erase our elemental knowledge and memory of preservation of the white race. I'll be doing a future video where I go in depth on these topics, but I'm going to give you a few things to think about here. And just real quick, remember the Facebook page, Rhesus Negative Research. A link is located in the description. A lot of the stuff that I'm reading here now in this section of it will also be posted on that page, plus other insights that you can't get anywhere else. The Rh factor was discovered in 1940 by Carl Landsteiner and A.S. Wiener, however you want to say that. However, it was not reported to the general public until 1944. Now, pay attention to these dates. So the Rh factor was discovered in 1940. It wasn't reported till 1944. And then in 1947 started the UF sightings and the alien theories. This led to stories of aliens, alien abductions, and at some point thereafter the stories that accused Rh negatives of being aliens proceeded. The RhoGAM shot was invented in the 1960s, and then the world population explodes after that. This clearly shows that since 1960, the world's Rh positive population has increased by almost 5 billion. That is just in 62 years, okay? The implications, in my opinion, are that, number one, theories of Rh negs being not from Earth and being descendants of aliens and the general demonization of Rh negs coincides with alien abductions and stories that accuse Rh negs of being aliens, such as the History Channel and other mainstream news and medias that like to pervert medical science to focus on the origin of the Rhd negative instead of the origin, inheritance, and prevalence of the Rhd antigen. And number two, the RhoGAM shot is an Rh positive enabler, and the explosion of Rh positive population coincides with this invention of RhoGAM as well. And again, to prove my point, here's a screenshot of a response I got when I asked in a group how many people were Rh neg. This was in a cosmology group. And this guy responds, Rh neg is alien blood. Rh stands for the Rhesus monkey DNA. If you were Rh neg, you were descended from aliens. And my response was, no, that is entirely inaccurate. When testing for the Rh factor, it tests for the Rhd antigen. If you have it, you're Rh positive. If you don't, you're Rh negative. We are not descended from aliens. And being absent of the Rhd antigen does not mean we are from monkeys either. And also, I find it interesting that RhoGAM was originally called SkyMed, okay? Playing into the otherworldly alien theory origins of Rh negs. The first RHOD immunoglobulin treatment, SkyMed, was introduced in 1968. Again, look at those other dates I showed you and the correlation with the timing of this and calling it SkyMed. And also some other things to think about, more topic points that I want you to research and just really ponder on is the wiping out of Celtic men, and then Parthenogenesis happening amongst women, and then the witch hunts that preceded. Remember, the witch hunts only happened in Europe and into America. Why is that? Because they were after white women, white people specifically. They've wiped us out before with ancient technology. We've had to repopulate ourselves. Look at the number of Chinese people and Indians. Non-whites in general outnumber us, and there's a reason for that. They want to race bait us and make us think that we are not native to anywhere on the earth. They got us thinking that, a large majority of, white people who are Rh negs are aliens from outer space, and it's all a lie. So people are lying about Rh negatives. And also, Rh negatives don't have red hair and blue eyes. I'm sure that some do, but it's a false equivalent. It's rare, okay? Most Rh negs you'll find are brown-haired and brown eyes. White people, because obviously we're of Indo-European origin. Ancient Celts did not have red hair. That is a myth and a lie. My husband is even from the British Isles himself. I grew up in America. My family's from America, but yet my DNA says I'm almost 100% a Celtic. And that's because those Celts came over to America. Okay, and if you look up the Irish do not, and he'll tell you this too because he's lived around them, they do not, only a small percentage of Irish people actually have red hair. So anyway, and also I said research the connection between Basques and Celts. If you would like to advance your studies, I recommend the following. My Pure O.W.L.S workbook series available on Amazon, and the Online Women's Liberation Studies, acronym O.W.L.S website, a free literature for in-depth studies on elemental feminist philosophy. Also, please check out the categories section of the O.W.L.S website for comparative studies on mythology and religion. And note, men are also highly encouraged to use the O.W.L.S website and Pure O.W.L.S workbook series. As always, links are located in the description. Episodes still to come: the demonization of Rh-negs, debunking myths and conspiracies, the rhesus resistance, eradicating the RhD antigen, and my ancestral autosomal DNA and mtDNA results, ancient Celtic Brighton. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and follow our Facebook page for more information. Links are located in the description. Thanks for listening.